Well, hi everybody, I'm Bill Whittle and this is Afterburner. Well, needless to say, there's a lot of disappointment and despair among conservatives in the wake of the Obamacare ruling, and you don't have to go far to find people thinking that this encroachment on our freedoms is inevitable and it can't be stopped. So I thought I'd take this 4th of July holiday to take us back through our history to a few other 4th of July holidays to give us a little perspective. You know, the first 4th of July was a solemn and not a celebratory time. This is the flag that flew over the Revolution. 1777 came, and 1778, and 79, and 80, and every year things looked worse and worse and worse. Those small colonies with their starving armies arrayed against the mightiest force on earth didn't seem to have any chance to survive. But they did, somehow. Somehow they hung on to the victory the following year in 1781 and the peace treaty 2 years later. 4th of July of 1814 wasn't much fun either. Imagine the feeling when this flag flew over our country. The British Army was about to march on Washington, and they did it too. They burned our Capitol and our White House, and it looked like the American experiment might last but a single generation. But it didn't. On July 4th of 1863, this American flag flew over the same fields as another American flag, just outside the farms near a small town in Pennsylvania. And there, on the 4th of July, 8,000 American men lay dead from the battle that had ended the day before, a battle bloodier than anything in America's bloodiest war, barely halfway through the 5 years that tore this country to pieces and then welded it back together again. You know, if you stood there on the fields of Gettysburg and pondered the future of the country, would it look darker to you than it does today? On the 4th of July of 1918, we had 48 stars in the flag, and in France, the Germans were wrapping up their spring offensives that had split the Allied armies and nearly driven them into the sea. After years of bloody stalemate and finally some hope that American forces might turn the tide, well, suddenly victory seemed as far from those trenches as the Kentucky and Iowa farms of the men that fell there. But 4 months later, war was over. But not the helplessness and not the despair, because that same year, a Spanish flu epidemic tore through the entire world, and that 4th of July and the next one in 1919 were not just met by cheers over fireworks. They were met by the shrieks and tears of the mothers and fathers, the sons and daughters, and brothers and sisters of the 675,000 Americans that died of that epidemic helplessly at home right in front of their eyes. How you feeling now? You know, we still had 48 stars on the flag on July 4th, 1945, and even though the war in Germany was safely over at terrible cost, American families took a breath and watched as Japanese resistance grew ever fiercer. Both the Marines and the soldiers in the army that had managed to survive the European conflict, and all of their friends and all of their families lived that 4th as if it was going to be someone's last, because on that glorious 4th, we knew that we were probably going to take 1 million casualties in Operation Olympic, the amphibious invasion of Japan. But again, 1 month later, there was a flash out of the blue, and that war was over too. Can you imagine how that must have felt to have that terror and that desperate fear turn to elation overnight? Well, many of you don't have to imagine it. Many of you were there. Pretty soon we had 50 stars on our flag, and through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, some of us, people like me, say, remember how you could never really, truly feel safe in those days? Not with 25,000 nuclear weapons aimed at our picnic tables and our barbecues. Now that threat is not completely past, but we don't wear the weight of it every day like we used to. And only the youngest of us do not remember that sick sense of dread and apprehension on July 4th of 2002, waiting to see if they were going to come again. Remember that? Remember having our cars checked for bombs? Remember looking at airplanes and wondering if they were going to be turned into weapons again? Remember watching Super Bowls and Thanksgiving Day parades or any large happy gathering and wondering if it was all going to happen again? Well, that's all gone now. The might of the British Army, or the Confederate Army, or the German Army, or the Japanese Army, gone. The Nazis are gone. The Soviets are gone. And yet again, the men and women who have kept us safe have kicked Al-Qaeda's teeth in and air-conditioned the man who brought them to our shores. They're all gone. We're still here. So happy 4th of July, everyone. The election will keep, don't worry. Go out and have a hot dog and a beer with your countrymen. Relax and have some fun, because we've all earned it. Obamacare, the election, PJTV and I will all be here when you get back.